Welcome back to Aether Hour, everybody. I'm your host, Conrad Franz, joined as always by Dmitriy Kalugin, and we have a great show for you today. It's going to be a bit of a general survey of kind of the current situation of, I guess you could say, the noticing and some of the other things that have been going on around the world. Of course, some personal updates as well. World War Now, we've been in the news. There was a article published in Texas Monthly by a journalist that I used to know from my undergraduate college days where yours truly is referred to as a far-right podcast host, and this show is referred to as a far-right show, which, we just can't stand for that, right? So we're going to be talking about all that, some Candace Owens developments, my question to Metropolitan Neophytos of Morphu. We're going to be playing that for you. So big things in store for this fantastic episode. Dmitry, how are you doing?
Doing great, Conrad, and it's really wonderful receiving publicity in the local American press, especially of a well-known state such as Texas, and not just alongside any sort of clergyman being given the spotlight, but one such an esteemed clergyman as Father John Whiteford, whose positions we are well aware of because they are very, very strong Orthodox Christian positions, and who we've actually had as a guest on one of the previous Aether Hour episodes, which I recommend everybody go check out. We'll have it in the description link, which you'll see Father John is actually a very caring, very loving Orthodox Christian priest, but this particular article, right, paints him in a very strange, devious light, and essentially he's nothing like the article portrays him as. And even the caricaturization, I think, of the Orthodox faith as something that is clearly just explicitly political. In fact, when Orthodox Christianity, right, it's not just about politics. Politics is just one of the elements of human existence, right? It's something you see on parish councils. It's something which you experience in like your local democracies, voting for your local mayor or your local member of parliament or something like that. It's just part of everyday life, right? But this article makes it explicitly out as if we're some sort of party in the American, political system, which unfortunately we're not. But it does kind of paint us as the enemy. And by us, I mean, of course, Orthodox Christians who are more of a more conservative mindset, and World War Now being, I guess, an explicit antagonist in this major mosaic of like right-wing content creators, apparently from America. So, and even the title of the article, Coronate, is just really explicitly defamatory, even though I do find it somewhat based. But then again, it's the goal of the article is to force ridicule upon us. So the article title is Inspired by the Confederacy and Tsarist Russia, Ortho Bros are on the rise. Like, seriously? I mean, you couldn't think of anything else to maybe catch the attention of the local American, I don't know, maybe center-left Democrat. Like, they wouldn't even know what they're looking at with a title such as this. I mean, if you're not like online every day, perhaps on Twitter or YouTube, you may not even know what an orthobro is. But here we are. We'll have to kind of explain the concept to listeners who are unaware. But I think Father John, definitely his address, his handling of the situation, him being the primary victim, was very, very telling. And it's kind of good that he handled it for us, Conrad, because his approach is very, very pastoral, as well as very humble. I think if I was the subject of this particular article, I think my approach would be a lot more passionate, and probably I'd be tempted by the evil one to sort of make a more emotional outburst. But I think he's kind of dulled the fire, which this article was, trying to provoke an explicit reaction from the Christian conservative community in America.
Yeah, I can give some good background on this because I obviously knew this article was coming. The author, Megan Clark Saliashvili, she messaged me months ago asking for an interview. With consulting other people like Father John, who had already talked to her, Rebecca Dillingham, Dissident Mama, Michael Sisko, some other people, a few others that were obviously mentioned in the piece. Buck Johnson gets a mention in there as well. So a bunch of people, all people that we've talked to, either that have been on our show or we've been on their shows. So, the network has been clocked, I guess you could say, in that regard, of people spreading the truth. But I knew this was going to be a hit piece even before I saw the headline because I asked her what title she was going to go with while I was still kind of giving her the runaround and not talking to her. I was curious, and she said, I'm thinking the rise of the Ortho Bros. And you can see, that part of it made it into the second half of the title. I mean, after, of course, inspired by the Confederacy and Tsarist Russia. So she, of course, felt it was very important to leave that out when she told me the title when she was trying to get me, to be interviewed for this piece. So very deceptive, classic journalist behaviors. As they say, just don't trust journalists. I guess I'm forced to be classified as a journalist, unfortunately, but I still say strongly, don't trust journalists. And I knew this was going to be bad even before all the nonsense going on in the DMs occurred because one, I knew she's friends with Sarah Riccardi Schwartz, and two, before this girl even became Orthodox, I knew who she was because we went to the same undergrad. We went to the King's College in New York City in downtown Manhattan, which no longer offers classes. So I guess I can freely speak about it without any fear of the institution talking about me because they don't have anything to say anymore. But I did get a great education there. I made some great friends. I had some great professors, so I'm not really crapping on the school, but I was in the sort of journalism, like before they had a whole journalism department, I was in the kind of journalism track at King's, and she was, I think, a year above me or whatever it is, and she became the editor of this rag, Religion Unplugged, which is this globalist, ecumenist kind of religion outlet that is run by former Rolling Stone editors and just sort of mainstream media people. And when I was a senior, I was writing articles for this class on religion reporting, and my professor kept saying some of my articles were good. I should send them to Religion Unplugged. So I sent this one piece on Armenia, Azerbaijan to Religion Unplugged. And Megan Clark, then just Megan Clark, before she married her Georgian husband, she sends back to me her edits of my piece, and she basically removed like half of my sources because to her they were Russian propaganda. They were like RT, Sputnik, I think, maybe one or two others. And I asked her why she removed them, and she's like, "Oh, on Religion Unplugged, we don't link to Russian propaganda." But I was like, "Well, earlier in the piece, you didn't care that I linked to the BBC, which is, state-funded British state media." And she's like, "Oh, well, that's very different, blah, 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 journalistic standards." And I was like, "Okay, great. I see where you come from on the ideological side of things." And so the fact that she then wrote this piece isn't surprising at all. And the fact that she then became Orthodox, marrying a Georgian, I was like, I have a feeling her opinions on Russia haven't changed. So, knowing all of that, I was able to not fall into the trap of being interviewed by this girl. But unfortunately, Father John is really the main recipient of any kind of ire that is meant to be directed in this piece. My section of it is really just kind of a throw in drive by shot, just to kind of add me as, I guess, sort of evidence to pad the sources that there really is, I guess, some kind of far right problem. I'll just read my section. I'm not going to link the article because I don't want to give her clicks, but all it says about me is nearby in the Austin area. This is after talking about Father John Whiteford and his appearance on Buck Johnson's show and his appearance at the Ludwell Orthodox Fellowship Conference about Southern Orthodoxy. So they suddenly come in out of nowhere. Nearby in the Austin area, 25-year-old Conrad Franz co-hosts the far-right podcast World War Now and co-writes a Substack newsletter with the same title. They're the same thing, but close enough. France, who converted to Orthodoxy in 2020, hopes a revitalized Orthodox monarchy will replace secular globalism. That's accurate. In an episode recorded after the October 7th attack on Israel, he and his co-host tied Zionists to the rise of communism, the collapse of Russia's monarchy, and the decline of Christians in the Holy Land. All of those things are 100% true, so she didn't really do me too dirty. Obviously, the far-right label is unnecessary and just completely subjective, but I was offended as well, Dmitry. She couldn't even name you in the article. She says you get his co-host. You get referred to in a secondary sense, but she guess didn't throw you in there. Offensive. But the funny thing about it is the entire article is mostly about Rocor and specifically Father John's parish and everybody else mentioned in the piece. Michael Sisko, Buck Johnson. There's passing references to Rebecca Dillingham. All of them are in Rocor, and then they get this random Antiochian guy. They throw me in there just because, it's not even that coherent of a specific case. It's just sort of a catch-all, like, oh, here's a bunch of people that ostensibly we can frame as very far right. Let's put this out to this general cosmopolitan liberal Texas audience at Texas Monthly, which is declining in readership as far as I'm aware, by the way. So that's that. But yeah, it was interesting. I was at the monastery near me when this all dropped, which was very funny. So I was not really bothered by it. The only bothersome aspect of it to me is that it's unfortunate that I'm even associated with this piece slandering Father John, making him look all spooky, darkening the pictures they took of him at his parish so that he looks a certain way. But what we will link below is Father John's response, which was quite good. So be sure to click on that if you want to read anything further about this.
That's right. So, I mean, this is a classic attack upon Orthodox Christianity, which this has been taking place in the 19th century. This when really newspapers began mass printing caricatures of Russian priests, clergymen, all over France and England, especially during the Napoleonic Wars. It was really popular to just draw cartoon priests as these like dark sorcerers, things like that. And of course, this translated even into World War One, when unfortunately German and Austrian propaganda began mass spreading these bizarre stories and slanderous pieces about Rasputin, essentially portraying him as this dark monk who would rule Russia. And I mean, we see this kind of today. That is still the predominant myth. And so Father John is portrayed as this weird, like, Texas Rasputin type figure who pushes Tsars. And of course, Tsarism is essentially a curse word for these people, whereas for us it's a term of endearment. It's like, oh well, of course, that's me, I'm the monarchist priest. Or we even quote St. John of Kronstadt, who says a priest who isn't a monarchist isn't worthy to even stand at the altar and serve. So I mean, these are some strong quotations we have from our church fathers, especially those of the 20th century, when essentially this entire political tornado began spinning, when the people, of course, fell away from God in Russia and essentially caused this Rokor exodus, which I mean we're kind of living out today. Which I mean, fortunately, it has led to the conversion of many based conservative Americans and other European peoples, and I mean I would say just many people from various countries around the world, and which this unfortunately this woman is attacking that exact particular movement. Notice how you're right; it is a pinpoint direct attack at Rokor. You're kind of getting hit here as collateral because, again, not only am I a member of Rokor, but also a lot of our guests are. So I think she's kind of tying this together with all these guests, along with Rokor's sort of staunch conservative view and position on, I would say, a lot of the a lot of the political positions throughout America and just outside of Russia on conservatism. Rokor has been quite consistent, unlike, unfortunately, maybe the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese and all of the ecumenical patriarchate dioceses abroad, I would say, which is very unfortunate for the Greeks because at home they're quite staunchly conservative, but that's something we discuss on the World War Now show a bit more in depth, especially in line of the recent gay marriage legislation that was passed and some of the reactions to that. But you just want to mention real quick, Conrad, it's almost as if the hit piece, it's aimed at maybe even canceling some of the people it speaks about. It's almost like, hey, this is a, but it's not a letter to the bishop, a private letter, seeking chastisement of these people. It's more of a, I'm going to publicize and defame Christianity, similar to that propaganda which used to, talk smack about Rasputin and the Tsar back in the World War One days. And in some cases, I would say, considering Rasputin was essentially martyred for the faith by really weird Masonic figures before the revolution during World War One, and Tsar Nicholas II, who was also slandered and ritually murdered during the revolution itself. I think it's quite endearing actually being amongst some of these people who, again, slandered for essentially being nothing but Christian, right? And just to comment, I suppose, briefly on the show itself, right? The World War Now show is, of course, a geopolitical journalistic endeavor here, and from an Orthodox perspective. Granted, that is because our philosophical outlook is such that, of course, we think that all humans come from a certain biased perspective. Everybody has a certain paradigm from which they're viewing world events from. And myself and Conrad in particular, we view world events from an Orthodox perspective, which we speak about constantly. It's not exactly a show that, proselytizes Orthodox Christianity. Unfortunately, I don't think neither me nor Conrad are trained in that particular endeavor. Of course, we do try and direct people to various churches, around the world or wherever they may be, to sort of participate in the faith, but naturally it is a journalistic political show. And so it's quite curious that she ties it directly to the works of Father John and claims it's some sort of anti-American weird project, which I don't think it would be. If anything, the show is explicitly pro-American because we actually speak about what kind of a positive future America may have if some of the issues are dealt with, productively and constructively. So it's just, I think, just painting Orthodox Christianity and the hopeful message which we give out almost on like twice a month, I would say. Roughly, we speak about these white pill moments in sort of American everyday. And look, we look forward to big events such as the American election, Trump's possible victory, what that may look like for us. And still, I guess we are painted as the bad guys here by none other than a member of the Georgian Orthodox Church, unfortunately, which, I mean, I can't speak bad about Georgian Orthodox brothers because at home in the homeland, the Georgians are incredibly conservative, but here in the diaspora, I'm not too sure what's happening. But that's a question to her priest and her husband, I would say, who really needs to probably keep his wife in line.
Well, I don't know about I don't know about if she's even in the Georgian Patriarchate in America. They're so small that perhaps if they knew about this, they might disapprove. I wouldn't be surprised if she was in, a more, a more Americanist aligned sort of parish, maybe within the OCA or Antioch or something, but or maybe Go Arch, of course. But that's one thing I want to point out before we move on from this silliness, of course, is there's this underlying attitude, and she now has, the ethnic Orthodox last name, and people may forget that she herself has been Orthodox for less time than even me, who, I've only really been in the Orthodox world. I've been Orthodox for over 4 years. I've been attending liturgy for over 5 years, so that's where I'm at in all of this, but she kind of has this underlying attitude that, oh, there's all these converts. She mentions that Father John is a convert priest, that everybody mentioned in the article are converts. She's like, all these attitudes, these conservative, these far right, whether they're monarchist. I mean, Father John himself isn't even a monarchist, so she's just kind of throwing us all into a bowl and slandering every which person with whatever she thinks will stick, regardless of which actual aspect they embody of her little mosaic she's put together. But this idea that these ideas that we're talking about on World War Now, or maybe Buck Johnson is talking about, or Rebecca Dillingham, or Cisco, or any of these people, this idea that these are just some Protestant convert imports that are because we didn't get rid of our baggage. I mean, I've talked to monastics and cradle Orthodox people in Orthodox countries. I'm talking Serbs, I'm talking Russians, I've talked to ethnic Greeks that have lived most of their lives at Greek Orthodox monasteries. And I just want to say to Megan, like, if she heard some of the conversations I had with these Orthodox brothers of mine, then I mean, I don't even know what to say. Like, to say that, talking about something like a monarchy, or talking about something like prophecies, like we talk about on the show, or talking about, something like specific political changes or specific, ideas behind alternative history or some of these sorts of things, to say that that has nothing to do with Orthodoxy. I mean, I would just encourage you to go talk to some people living, the angelic life, almost regardless of jurisdiction, and I think you'd find some fairly interesting perspectives on the world that we reside in today and how far it has fallen from not just the ideal that God has set out, but even some golden ages of Christian history in the past. And Father John makes a very good point. I talked to him about this. He's written about it. Is that ultimately the point of these articles isn't really to convince a bunch of people. It's really just written for other journalists and really the intelligence community. And that's the purpose. Is this is to get us in the Orthodox world and the growing Orthodox communities around America under the microscope of the federal government, of intelligence agencies, and that's what the Russia accusations are. That's why it's like they're far right, they're racist, they're also possibly funded by Putin, or they're pro-Putin. Those are the kind of things that can speed up, the process of getting intelligence agencies looking at you, as well as it'll also radicalize, these activist people. I mean, Father John says, I mean, these kind of things, if these articles keep coming out and people keep using this rhetoric about the far right, pro-Russian Orthodox world, people are going to get killed. People are going to show up to parishes, and people are going to want, to do terrible things to people, because all sorts of people can read this stuff online. So it's important to recognize that these people aren't writing this out of the goodness of their heart. They're not just bleeding heart liberals, because that's the thing. You read this and it's extremely establishment. If it was just some hardcore leftist, bleeding heart person, she would not be taking issue with all of the anti-Zionism that everybody involved in the article professes. Obviously, Father John is not a Zionist, and he gave a sermon, I believe, when Megan went and visited his parish, about how Orthodox cannot be Zionists and against, the horrible atrocities being perpetrated on the people of Gaza. And she mentions us, of course, how we blame Zionists for these and for all these sorts of things. And I guess the audience of Texas Monthly is older boomers, I guess, who may be Zionists, but this is just obviously an extremely establishment, almost pro-regime kind of piece, because it's implicitly Zionist, it's obviously very quote-unquote anti-racist, and it's really throwing out it's kind of leaning on the anti-Russian presuppositions of the past 8 years, ever since the Trump election and all of that nonsense was played out in the media. So that's one thing people need to recognize is, again, I'm not accusing Megan directly of taking money or being an asset or anything like that, but let's just say that if she was, she probably wouldn't be doing anything differently.
Yeah, look, I'm not her husband to chastise her for the ridiculous article that she has printed, and that's just my personal opinion. Like, it is just It's quite ludicrous, and in fact, yes, you're right. She may be liable both on a spiritual as well as, I would say, legal, if the legal system was of any effect level, for some of the damage that this article may cause to, of course, Orthodox Christians in America. So she really needs to repent, I would say, and just check with her spiritual father. Perhaps the article is worth deleting or perhaps editing, if she still has those rights in her particular business. I would say it's worth for her to look into that. Or if anyone knows her, I think that pass that message on, because she really does need to know that maybe there is a way to salvage this particular situation for her personally. And just regarding this Orthodox mindset, right, which she really doesn't touch upon, but which we can generally understand as the Orthodox conservative view towards, say, the future of America, the future of the world. Of course, she could have mentioned some of these things and how American Orthodoxy is very deeply tied to Orthodox Christians and hierarchs and some of these great, as I would say, modern even saints, like living saints, such as Metropolitan Neophytos or Morphu in the modern world. She doesn't tie it to any of these spiritually enlightening, I would say, subjects and elements of the Orthodox Christian life. It's simply a political slander piece. And what's interesting is even the conference that took place just at the beginning of Great Lent here in Alabama, which Conrad was an attendee of, alongside Father Peter Heers and some of the other great members of the Orthodox Christian community, both abroad and domestically in America. What was great was the potential questions that were asked. I mean, Conrad explicitly got to ask Metropolitan Neophytos of Morphu a question of choice, which spoke specifically to some of the future events which may take place, and which may affect the lives of young American Orthodox Christians, and how exactly they should be approaching these coming calamities, which of course the prophecy spoke about. I mean, what a great question to actually ask a great hierarch of our time, who we spoke about on so many episodes, and who we've actually strived to ask questions from, for a while now.
Yeah, the conference was great in that regard. Of course, we talked about it on the last episode of World War Now, but I found it funny, just to briefly wrap up the whole thing with the article, is she didn't ever mention any of my visits to Russia. She also, of course, published the article right before the conference, so she didn't bring that up, which of course would involve her writing about multiple bishops that clearly support, the quote unquote far right, I guess, that she would describe. But yeah, the fact that she didn't mention any of my trips to Russia, I guess she missed an opportunity to call me a shill and to, call me out for being some kind of Russian stooge of some kind, which of course, just to set the record straight, I'm not. I don't feel like I even have to say that. But you mentioned the conference. Of course, I was privileged enough to ask Metropolitan Neophytos of Morphu a question. It was quite the privilege, and we're going to have that linked below, obviously. I'd love it if you would share it on social media, but I'm going to go ahead and play it for everybody here.
Another question. I'll say it in English and you can translate. You have enlightened many around the world to the words of the saints, prophets of the 20th century. Eldris Galactia warned that many horrible things will come upon America. My question to you, Your Eminence, is about us younger, faithful Orthodox men should do. What should we do? Do we shore up the monasteries and small saintly deposit we have here? Or should we perhaps take our families to countries like Cyprus, where we will know the fighting may be less intense? Thank you for your stalwart witness to Christ. You are a true hero of mine.
Let everyone do according to his faith. We cannot have a single leveling strategy for all ages, whether these be bodily, biological, psychical, or spiritual ages. We cannot do this. It would be very fascist. It is not only the martial events that will occur all over the world, but we have also already tasted, till just a few years ago, the manufactured, fabricated global epidemic. Greece and Cyprus might not have acts of war, but we might have a revolution of the immigrants that have flooded us. We might have radioactive energy coming from the nearby Middle East. We might have a gigantic earthquake. So we mustn't only look at the prophecies regarding America. The events will be global because the sin is global. It's not only the Eldris Galactia that spoke of these events. In America, you had a great saint. The Eldris herself would tell us that he is the greatest saint of the 20th century, Elder Ephraim of Arizona. He also spoke of these events. If we want to be following the Holy Fathers, you need to pay closer attention to the experience of the Holy Elder Ephraim of Arizona. Look, our deeper concern should not be whether or not we will fall victims to a war, an earthquake, radioactive energy, a world war, a disease. If we are truly Orthodox, our concern will be our eternal life. If we bravely face these various events, in whichever continent they may occur, if we face them with an orthodox bravery and not fearfully, then these events may prove an opportunity for us to live eternally with our Holy Fathers and Holy Mothers in the uncreated light of the Trinal Godhead, about which Eldris Galactia said that it is full of information. Personally, I would say that I am facing these events, which have already begun to happen, as a chance for Orthodox confession, and as a ticket for lazy me to enter the eternal life. Fear does not become Christians.
So yeah, that is the answer to my question. I thought, I had the chance to ask one, so I had a hard time considering which one to ask, but I think it was a good question. Some monks told me to ask about America, so I did just that, and I think it was a fantastic answer. I think he balanced both the fact that not everybody is going to be able to move to another country, or not everybody necessarily is going to have the strength to stay in America during what's going to happen. So, of course, let each do according to his faith, like he said. But the fact that he called Elder Ephraim, the greatest saint of the 20th century, that's a big honor to America. And I think it shows that while America may not have many saints compared to Greece or Russia or Georgia and these places that, you walk down the street and there's relics of a saint you've never even heard of at some church that has an amazing story. We don't have as many of those people in America, but the fact that the ones we do have, like Elder Ephraim and, Father Seraphim Rose and Archbishop Averki and, Brother Jose Munoz, I mentioned that in my question, the smaller saintly deposit we have here. Metropolitan Neophytos said, well, it's not so small because Elder Ephraim very well may be the greatest saint of the 20th century. So I found it a very encouraging question, and me and Dmitry look forward to, in the future, whether it's in Cyprus itself or, over the airwaves, asking more questions and getting more wisdom from His Eminence.
Yeah, I found the words of His Eminence, and I mean, the question was greatly well put, but I think his insights and his answer was even more to the point. Like it spoke to, I think, several levels, both spiritually as well as I would even say politically, answering some of the concerns that people may have. Like he spoke about the disasters that could take place essentially even in safe places around the world, such as Greece and Cyprus, and that the main concerns for Orthodox Christians are so that we're called to repentance in the state that we are at the moment. Not, regardless of the fact which calamity is just around the corner, we need to prepare now. And essentially, what a great time to sort of hear an answer such as this during the first week of Great Lent. I would say incredibly encouraging, and politically speaking, this ties into, of course, the story we spoke about with the Texas Monthly article, because again, you never know when the vipers of the world will strike out and lash out at you with their poison fangs, and essentially we do need God's protection. I mean, the Lord does protect us even from hit pieces such as this. Notice that the Texas Monthly, like this article, could have been published in a more well-known newspaper, or the story could have been given to some other journalist. It could have been a lot more, I would say, a lot more poisonous, a lot more deadly, and in fact, it kind of just died out over the last fortnight, which, again, glory to God, He turns sort of the plans of our enemies against themselves in a way. And so hopefully this story will go nowhere, in fact. And I mean, we saw examples all throughout the lives of saints where, even in the 20th century, a lot of saints in Romania, Russia, all over Eastern Europe were protected from the NKVD, various Judeo-Talmudic organizations trying to seek them out and to, essentially martyr them. Not everybody was martyred and murdered, executed under the sort of authority of the Judeo-Bolsheviks, because God protected some saints in order for them to survive and live out the rest of their lives as confessors. So not everybody has the same fate, I would say, in the Orthodox Church. Some people God actually protects in order for them to bring other fruits. And so perhaps this is kind of like our maybe path forward here, I would say, in a more journalistic, maybe small scale fashion, right? It's not to be entirely cancelled, not to be banned on different platforms, but to kind of remain and to sort of go on fearlessly, which is, again, what Metropolitan Neophytos spoke about, where, we do need fearlessness, not just from political reprimand and sort of censure, I would say, not from the clergymen and the bishops. We shouldn't fear that, but we should fear, of course, censure from the political overlords and the class, the deep state, I would say, which is still reigning in America and in many countries abroad. I would say even in places such as Russia. We saw what happened to Igor Strelkov. Like, it takes a lot of guts to sort of speak your mind, especially as an Orthodox Christian in today's world. And so his words, I think, ring true for all Orthodox Christians around the world. So I would say, generally speaking, the answer Metropolitan Neophytos addresses many of the issues and I think some of the angst that Orthodox Christians would have living in America and in many countries abroad, because especially in the post-COVID world, we've kind of shown especially how vulnerable we are to not just the whims of our government, but also to any potential calamities taking place. Like, we've seen the weaknesses of some clergymen, especially in sort of leadership positions, how certain people may falter. We've seen the weaknesses of course, the laity in their sort of hundreds and very large percentages, of course, falling away, not attending church over large swaths of time because of the fear of illness or some sort of following other misinformation and fake news. And nevertheless, he states to us very clearly that the way forward is to be fearless, and fearless through Christ, fearless through Christianity, and of course in the beliefs which we have to hold dear to and hold strongly to. And that's probably a really good message, I think, for everybody, regardless of your profession or wherever you may work, and spiritually as well as, I would say, in a secular fashion. That's the way forward.
Yeah, we'll have the full Q&A linked below because Metropolitan Neophytos answers some other great questions. He even talks about how he's very confident for the upcoming ecumenical council that will set a lot of things right in the church as prophesied by St. Porphyrios. He talks about that among a myriad of other issues that are relevant to, Christians in these latter days. But we'll also link his full translated, uncensored TASS interview that we've been talking about. It's been released, with subtitles in full, and it's a great watch as well. He mentions, a number of relevant issues that tie into even some of the questions he answers in the Q&A. So we're going to have all of that linked below as well. But as far as, what he talks about with, I guess not fearing and everything like that, it's very important to recognize that the talk about all these prophecies and, the things that we mentioned, it's not so that people freak out and get scared and take some kind of dramatic preparatory action. And that's not to say that we're against prepping or anything like that, but it's to say that it's in many ways to encourage you, because these things are going to happen, and to know that the wisdom of the church and the Holy Spirit has amply prepared the people for this, that if to the point where if even, lay people are understanding that what's going to pass is going to pass, then of course God is prepared for any kind of fallout that may come from this. There's never going to be something so spiritually overwhelming that will come to pass that, the gates of hell will prevail over the church or anything like that. So as Metropolitan Neophytos says, this is all a great opportunity as well to both increase in prayer and asceticism, and I think to preach the gospel. Of course, I think we know, again, whether it comes to the Tsar, the Marble King, or some of these other things, even outside of those possibilities, these sort of times of perdition, for lack of a better word, are a great time to, to reach out to people, because people are, realizing the brokenness of the world and the brokenness of their, their human nature and all of these sorts of things. So it's a great time to talk to people in your life, or just generally speaking, about the reality of the gospel and the reality of the Orthodox Church, especially in kind of these post-Christian countries of the West, where people recognize that they need God, but they also recognize there are some fundamental civilizational flaws with perhaps the traditions that they knew in the 20th century as quote-unquote Christians. So very great opportunity to spread the gospel. But I think, Dmitry, we got to get to some of the big news, and that is Candace Owens, who has, as of this recording just a few hours ago, been fired by the Daily Wire. Thank you so much for listening to the free preview of Aether Hour, everybody. Don't be afraid to get behind the paywall. You'll hear us talk about Candace Owens in full. We really break down the whole thing, no holds barred. So we go there, you know what I mean? It's a spicy one, so don't be afraid to get behind the paywall. It really supports the show. You'll get access to all the 35 plus episodes of Aether Hour in the past. So really great back wall of content, some great stuff. And of course, also in the episode, we talk about the attempt to cancel the Holy Week hymns, the Fortumite efforts on all of those sorts of things. So really good Aether Hour this week. Thank you so much for listening, and God bless. I'll see you on the other side.